The afternoon sun streamed through the large industrial windows of the Copper Kettle, a trendy downtown cafe that had been featured in every lifestyle magazine worth reading. The warm light created dancing patterns across the exposed brick walls and polished copper accents, making the space feel both modern and timeless. Ethan Reynolds sat alone at a corner table, checking his phone for the 10th time in as many minutes. At 39 years old, he had everything a successful man was supposed to want: a corner office in the city's most prestigious building, a portfolio worth millions, and a reputation as one of the sharpest minds in commercial real estate. What he did not have was someone to share it with. His assistant Rachel had arranged this blind date after watching him work through yet another weekend alone. She had been mysterious about the details, saying only that the woman was beautiful, accomplished, and exactly what he needed. Ethan suspected she was setting him up with one of her model friends, the type of polished, glamorous woman who usually appeared on his arm at charity galas before disappearing when they realized he was married to his work. He straightened his charcoal suit jacket and took a sip of his espresso, preparing himself for another evening of forced conversation about Fashion Week and Instagram followers. He was already planning his exit strategy when the cafe door opened. The woman who entered was not what he expected. She was lovely. There was no denying that. Perhaps 27 or 28, with soft features and light brown hair pulled back in a simple style. She wore a modest powder blue dress that looked more Sunday brunch than first date, and she carried a 2-year-old daughter on her hip. The little girl wore a pink floral dress and had auburn curls that caught the light like copper pennies. The woman scanned the cafe with nervous eyes, clearly looking for someone. When her gaze landed on Ethan, she checked her phone, then looked back at him with an expression that mixed hope and dread in equal measure. Ethan felt his stomach drop as she began walking toward his table. This could not be his date. Rachel would not have set him up with a single mother. She knew his life had no room for complications, for playdates and pediatrician appointments, for anyone who needed more than he could give. But the woman stopped at his table, shifting the toddler to her other hip. "Ethan Reynolds?" she asked, her voice soft and uncertain. "Yes," Ethan managed, still hoping this was some kind of mistake. "I'm Sophie Mitchell," she said, and Ethan heard the tremor in her voice. "Rachel set us up. I'm so sorry. I know this is not what you expected. My babysitter canceled at the last minute, and I tried to call Rachel, but she was in a meeting. And I almost did not come at all, but she has been so kind to me, and I did not want to stand you up without explanation." The words tumbled out in a rush, each one making Ethan's planned exit feel more inevitable. The little girl in Sophie's arms stared at him with wide hazel eyes, her thumb in her mouth. "This is my daughter, Lily," Sophie continued, bouncing the child gently. "I completely understand if you want to reschedule or if this is just too awkward. I can leave right now." Ethan opened his mouth to agree, to suggest they reschedule for a time when she had childcare, knowing full well he would cancel before that time came. But before he could speak, the little girl reached out her pudgy hand toward him and smiled, revealing tiny white teeth. "Hi," Lily said around her thumb, her voice sweet and trusting. Ethan found himself smiling back before he could stop himself. "Hello, Lily." "Please, sit down," he heard himself say, pulling out the chair across from him. "At least for a few minutes." Relief washed over Sophie's face as she settled into the chair, adjusting Lily on her lap. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I know this is completely inappropriate for a first date. You probably think I'm a disaster." "I think you're honest," Ethan said, surprising himself with the truth of it. "You could have pretended your daughter was your niece or made up some excuse. Instead, you told me exactly what happened." Sophie smiled, and it transformed her entire face. "I'm terrible at lying," she admitted. "My face always gives me away. Besides, Lily is the most important part of my life. Anyone who wants to know me needs to know that from the start." A server appeared, and Sophie ordered hot chocolate for herself, apologizing that she could not afford anything more expensive. The admission should have embarrassed her, but she said it with simple dignity, as if poverty was just another fact of life to be acknowledged. Ethan ordered a coffee he did not want just to give them a reason to stay. So, Sophie said, pulling a small container of crackers from her bag and handing them to Lily, Rachel tells me you're very successful. She talks about you like you walk on water. Ethan felt his guard go up. Rachel is biased. I'm just someone who works too much and has forgotten how to do much else. That sounds lonely, Sophie said, and there was such genuine compassion in her eyes that Ethan felt something crack inside his carefully constructed walls. It is, he admitted, the words escaping before he could stop them. I built a company from nothing, proved everyone wrong who said I would fail, and ended up with an empire, but an empty apartment to come home to. Sophie nodded slowly. I understand loneliness, she said softly. Mine comes from different circumstances, but I understand it. What happened? Ethan asked, genuinely curious despite himself. Sophie glanced down at Lily, who was contentedly munching crackers and looking around the cafe with wide-eyed wonder. Lily's father left when I was 6 months pregnant. He said he was not ready to be a father, that I should have been more careful, that he had dreams that did not include changing diapers. She said it without bitterness, just a quiet sadness. I worked at a bookstore until Lily was born, then I stayed home with her for the first year. Now I work part-time at a library and babysit in the evenings to make ends meet. It's not glamorous, but we have each other and we're happy. Ethan watched as Lily offered her mother a cracker, and Sophie pretended to eat it with exaggerated delight, making her daughter giggle. The love between them was so tangible it seemed to fill the air around their table. Rachel works at the library on Saturday mornings, Sophie continued. She volunteers reading to children. We became friends, and when she heard I had not been on a date since Lily was born, she insisted on setting this up. I told her nobody would want to date a single mom with no money and a toddler, but she said you were different, that you were lonely too, and maybe we could understand each other. I'm beginning to think Rachel is smarter than I give her credit for, Ethan said quietly. Sophie looked up, surprise in her eyes. You're not running for the exit? I was planning to, Ethan admitted. When you walked in with Lily, I was already composing my excuse. But then your daughter smiled at me, and you were so honest about everything, and I realized I have spent 10 years surrounding myself with people who want something from me. You're the first person in longer than I can remember who seems content just being herself. Their drinks arrived, and Lily reached for Sophie's hot chocolate with grabby hands. Sophie gently redirected her to a sippy cup of water she pulled from her bag, wiping chocolate from the rim of her own cup with a napkin before taking a sip. Tell me about your work, Sophie said. What do you do when you're building empires? Ethan found himself talking about his company, but not in the boastful way he did at networking events. He talked about the challenge of it, the satisfaction of turning abandoned buildings into thriving communities, the pride of giving people jobs and opportunities. Sophie listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions that showed she was really hearing him. In turn, he asked about her life, and Sophie painted a picture of simple joys and daily struggles. She talked about story time at the library, about the elderly regulars who came in just for conversation, about Lily's fascination with books even though she could not yet read. She described their tiny apartment with such warmth that it sounded more appealing than his luxury penthouse. Lily grew restless, and Sophie pulled crayons and paper from her bag, spreading them on the table. The little girl set to work creating colorful scribbles, narrating her artwork in a stream of toddler babble that made no sense but somehow needed no translation. Sorry, Sophie said, wiping a crayon mark off the table. She's an artist. Don't apologize, Ethan said, watching Lily work with intense concentration. When was the last time you did something just for the joy of it, without worrying about the outcome? Sophie tilted her head, considering. Yesterday, actually. We had a dance party in our living room. Just me and Lily spinning around to silly songs until we were both dizzy and laughing. Ethan could not remember the last time he had laughed until he was dizzy. He could not remember the last time he had done anything without calculating its value, its return on investment, its strategic importance. That sounds perfect, he said quietly. It was, Sophie agreed, smoothing Lily's curls with a gentle hand. These are the moments I'll remember when I'm old. Not the struggles or the money worries, but the dancing and the laughter and the way she looks at me like I hung the moon." They talked for over an hour, the conversation flowing easily from topic to topic. Ethan found himself laughing at Sophie's stories about library patrons and their peculiar requests. Sophie listened with rapt attention to his description of his latest building project, asking questions that showed she understood the vision behind the blueprints. Lily eventually climbed down from Sophie's lap and approached Ethan's side of the table, offering him a drawing of what might have been a flower or possibly a sun. "For me?" Ethan asked, taking the paper with appropriate reverence. Lily nodded solemnly, then climbed onto the chair beside him, apparently deciding he was trustworthy. She leaned against his arm, sticky fingers and all, and went back to her coloring. Sophie's eyes went wide. "Lily doesn't usually warm up to strangers," she said softly. "She must really like you." Ethan looked down at the small person leaning against him with such casual trust and felt something shift inside his chest. This was what he had been missing in his carefully curated life: authenticity, connection, the simple joy of being with someone who asked nothing of him except his presence. "I really like her too," Ethan said, meeting Sophie's eyes across the table. The moment stretched between them, weighted with possibility and fear and hope. Then Lily yawned hugely, and Sophie glanced at her phone with obvious reluctance. "I should get her home for her nap," Sophie said, starting to gather crayons and papers. "Thank you for being so gracious about this disaster of a first date." "This was the best first date I've had in years," Ethan said, and he meant it. "Can I see you again?" Sophie paused, searching his face for sincerity. "Ethan, I need you to understand something. I come as a package deal. I don't have money for fancy restaurants or designer clothes. My life revolves around nap schedules and library story hours. I'm not the glamorous type of woman someone like you usually dates. Someone like me is tired of glamorous," Ethan said. "Someone like me just spent an hour talking to a woman who made him remember why life is worth living. Someone like me would very much like to have dinner with you again, maybe at your place so Lily can be comfortable, if you would trust me enough to allow that." Tears shimmered in Sophie's eyes. "You would come to my tiny apartment and eat whatever I could afford to cook?" "I would be honored," Ethan said simply. Sophie wrote her address on a napkin with a crayon, her hand shaking slightly. "Friday night?" she asked. 6 o'clock? I can't promise anything fancy." "Friday at 6 is perfect," Ethan confirmed. As Sophie gathered Lily and her bag, the little girl reached out and touched Ethan's face with one small hand. "Bye-bye," she said clearly. "Goodbye, Lily," Ethan replied, his voice rough with unexpected emotion. He watched them leave. Sophie in her modest blue dress carrying her daughter past the chrome and copper elegance of the cafe. They looked out of place among the trendy crowd, but to Ethan, they looked like the only real thing in the room. That Friday, Ethan climbed 3 flights of stairs to a tiny apartment in a building that had seen better days. Sophie answered the door in jeans and a simple sweater, flour on her cheek and worry in her eyes. "I made spaghetti," she said. "It's all I could afford this week." "I'm sorry it's not more." "It smells wonderful," Ethan said truthfully, stepping into the small space that Sophie had transformed into a home with second-hand furniture and handmade touches. Lily ran to him immediately, showing him every toy she owned in rapid succession. They ate dinner at a table barely big enough for 3, and it was the best meal Ethan had eaten in years. After dinner, he helped wash dishes while Sophie put Lily to bed, and they talked quietly in the small living room about dreams and fears and the courage it took to be vulnerable. When Ethan finally left, well past midnight, he stood in the hallway for a long moment before descending the stairs. He had walked into that cafe expecting nothing and had walked out with something precious, the beginning of understanding what had been missing from his life. Over the following months, Ethan became a regular fixture in Sophie and Lily's life. He traded business dinners for story time, board meetings for park visits, networking events for quiet evenings in their tiny apartment. His colleagues were baffled. His friends thought he had lost his mind. But Ethan had never been happier. He still ran his empire, still closed deals and built buildings, but now he did it with purpose beyond profit. He created a scholarship fund for single parents, renovated affordable housing, invested in community libraries. Sophie had reminded him that success was not measured in square footage or stock prices, but in the lives you touched and the love you shared. And Lily, who had offered him a crayon drawing on their first meeting, taught him that the best things in life come with sticky fingers and unconditional trust. A year later, when Ethan proposed to Sophie in their favorite corner of the library where Rachel still read to children every Saturday, he did not offer her diamonds or mansions. He offered her his heart, which she had stolen the moment she walked into that cafe with honesty in her eyes and a toddler on her hip. "You already have everything," Sophie said through happy tears. "Why would you want my complicated life?" "Because you showed me that everything I had was nothing without someone to share it with," Ethan replied. "You and Lily didn't steal my heart. You saved it. Sometimes the people who change our lives arrive when we least expect them, in forms we never imagined, bearing gifts we did not know we needed. And sometimes the greatest fortune we can find is not in what we have, but in who we become when we open our hearts to love." If this story touched you, please like, share, and subscribe for more tales of unexpected love, second chances, and the courage to embrace what really matters. Leave a comment telling us about a time when someone surprised you by seeing beyond the surface to the person you really are, or when taking a chance on love changed everything. Your story could be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.